Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of the Higher Ed Geek Podcast, episode number 54, with Anne Trumbore, who is Senior Director for Wharton Online, so fellow higher ed tech person working in the online learning space. Really appreciated getting to hear Anne's unique story to where she is today and all that gave her. She's a kind of a properly geeky, nerdy background, so really appreciated connecting with Anne and kind of her team, just reaching out to be on the show. So kind of just good kind of random connection there. But a lot of cool stuff that we go into with Anne's story and kind of her history working through this new age of digital education that she's really been kind of at the ground level of. So really just kind of personally, professionally interesting to me, and I know you'll enjoy it as well. So appreciate you tuning in. And without further ado, this is episode number 54 with Anne Trumbore. You know, like looking through like your background and stuff, and just, you know, you're doing kind of similar work to, you know, what I'm doing, just working kind of like in the online higher ed space and everything.
Awesome.
And I feel like, yeah, your journey there, I'm very intrigued to explore that and just kind of like, you know, explore sort of what's on your mind and what you're engaging with and stuff. So, it should be a really good conversation, but
Fabulous.
Cool. Well, we can go ahead and jump in just so we kind of take advantage of the full time that we have together here. If you just want to kick us off while, you know, just introducing yourself and kind of giving a brief, introduction to your journey and how you got to be where you are today. And then we'll dig in with a couple of pieces of that, Cliff Notes.
I can do that and keep that get to higher ed in about 90 seconds to 2 minutes. So if I just hit the decision point, and cool. You can edit it out.
Yep. That's the other thing. If you need to like pause for a second to like, you know, because sometimes I'm like, you know, stuttering or stammering because I'm like getting too excited. Right. So I'm just like, all right, let me just pause because that'll allow me to like cut that part out. So yeah, feel free to like let me know if there's like, oh yeah, let me just, because I'll clean it up anyway just to make sure that like sounds pretty good. But yeah.
Awesome. All right.
Cool.
So let me know when you're ready to roll.
Cool. So yeah, if you want to just kick us off and introduce yourself in your professional journey of how you got to be where you are today, and then we'll kind of go from there.
Awesome. So my name is Anne Trumbore. Currently the Senior Director of Wharton Online. Wharton Online produces short form asynchronous courses in basic business topics. In the past 4 years, we've had over 220,000 certificates earned from our courses, and people report that they've been using them to get ahead in their careers. So I'm not quite a usual suspect to be working at a business school or even potentially to be working at online ed. I studied a lot of postmodern theory in college and tried to do some of it in French, but that was sort of failed. I'm not a terrible French speaker. And while I was in college, I had to work during college. I went to an expensive school, and I got a job writing for money for a newspaper, a local newspaper that was an arts and entertainment paper. And so when I graduated, I decided that I was going to try and make a living as a writer, and I moved to Los Angeles and had a couple of low rent jobs. And while I was doing that, I got a job at a trailer company and began writing movie posters, trailers, and TV spots. And that actually built upon my postmodern theory background, because postmodern theory is really difficult to read, and you have to be able to break it down into short summary pieces. And advertising a movie is essentially the same thing, except without the big words, right? You take a 2-hour media experience, and then you have to translate it into language. And sometimes, in the case of a movie poster, into just one sentence that's going to make people want to go see that movie.
Right.
And I really enjoyed that, and that was great. And then life intervened, and I had my son, and when he was a baby, the deadlines for the entertainment business were kind of difficult to keep up with. And I was in a writing group, and I got a call one day from someone in my writing group and said, "Hey, down at Stanford, they're looking for folks who can teach writing over the summer." So I got the job in about 2 days over email. They were desperate. And it turned out that job was run under an office called the Education Program for Gifted Youth. And it was run by a guy named Pat Supez, who was one of the first pioneers in online education. He was doing experiments in online ed in 1963. He wrote an article in Scientific American called The Uses of Computer in Education in 1966. And he was working on, his group was working on the first web-based instruction program that was totally asynchronous that Stanford had ever done. And it was in grammar because of my postmodern theory, which involved linguistics, and also because I had gone to Catholic school and had formally been taught grammar, plus I was a writing teacher and a professional writer. They said, great, can you run this grammar program? So I thought this was a great experiment, right? How can we use the web, which was new? This is the early 2000s, right? It's 2003, 2004. How can we use the web to try and figure out how to do language instruction, right? It was a really neat puzzle. So worked on that. And as we were working on it, technology began to evolve and broadband became available. And people started having access to faster internet connection. And we were approached by a local company called Saba, which was trying to do web conferencing, right? Synchronous meetings. And we thought, well, maybe we could try and do classes using this technology. So we tried to teach writing using that technology, and we were reasonably successful. So we taught writing classes. And then that group applied for a grant and said, I think we could start an online high school. So this is all the mid 2000s. We launched the online high school in 2008. My grammar program was used in it. And then when we expanded beyond the pilot phase, they asked me to develop the curriculum, the English curriculum for what we were calling the lower grades, so 7, 8, and 9. And I did that and was teaching synchronously and then also watching students use the asynchronous grammar program as homework and looking at the interactions with the technology and with the students when they met synchronously versus when they were using the computer asynchronously. And then the world blew up in 2011 in terms of online, because about 2 streets down from where my office was on the Stanford campus in the computer science building, Andrew Ng and Daphne Kohler and Sebastian Thrun offered some MOOCs. And these were the first MOOCs, and they exploded. And committees were assembled and and the higher ed machine went into orbit. So did the venture capital world, and a lot of details occurred. And by June, I was finishing up my class at the online high school, and I turned in my resignation letter and showed up at Coursera the next day. We had 4 partners at that time, and we only had 6 courses running. And over the next 6 weeks, actually, we went from 400,000 users to 2 million users. And we went from 4 partners to 16, and then in the next 3 months to 32. And that really became the fodder for the rest of my career.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Yeah, just being at those early stages of what's kind of now just accepted as pretty standard, facilitating classes over, video conferencing platforms and, just having the capacity to just do education online at a sort of high quality level and everything. But, I'm sure that's been quite the ride, being there kind of at those early stages and the kind of existential crisis in higher ed that happened with MOOCs, but then continuing to kind of drive that forward, where now it's sort of just again, it's not these things have replaced higher ed. It's sort of just augmenting to do oftentimes the same great work that educators have done, just digitally. So I think that's what I've always appreciated is certainly it is driving we almost have to kind of remix and kind of rethink how we're doing it in the digital space, because it's obviously not going to be exactly the same, but you don't have to kind of rethink all the fundamentals necessarily in certain capacities. So, because yeah, sometimes it's just a matter of like access for support services or just like, tutoring or whatever, just like kind of replicating it in the digital space. But there are also some great new different tools that are coming out that can, kind of drive innovation and kind of just like a different level of like, kind of academic engagement and education that's happening that you can do, in like asynchronous stuff or, just like with videos and stuff. But, yeah, and that's great. Like, I guess, cause I guess also like to, ask people even who aren't in higher ed, it's a lot of people who are, supporting students who listen to the show. And it sounds like from your college experience, at least one thing that came from it was that like, sort of writing and, all of that has been like a throughway, especially for, some of those early pit stops in your career and everything. So I'm not sure if some of this stuff is still resonating even in like the work that you're doing now in terms of just like how you communicate with people and convey ideas and like those sort of things, or like anything else like mentors or anything I get, like in terms of like, what do you feel like your college experience gave you that kind of still resonates?
Oh my gosh, so much. It's crazy because I had a very traditional seminar-based discussion, like crazy liberal arts experience. I have a degree in something called semiotics, which is now a discredited discipline. I basically, read a lot of theory in other languages, and then tried to do things like analyze Hitchcock movies or the cover of AC/DC's Back in Black album as a cultural artifact. And it was totally impractical. It was, and I don't like the word rigor because I think it gets misused, but I will say it was intellectually rigorous in that this was hard. It was also very new. And so there was a sense of risk and kind of danger about it. I will say that one of the reasons that I majored in it and was allowed to take these risks is that, I went to a school that didn't have grades. You could take courses pass fail. And even when you took a course for a grade, it was A, B, C, or no credit. So if you failed, it disappeared from your transcript, which, certainly got you in trouble with your parents, right? If it was like, wait, we paid for 4 courses and you passed 2. But so, there were short-term consequences, but there was no value in playing it safe in that kind of environment, right? Because you had access to all these great classes. And if you failed one, it wasn't going to follow you for the rest of your life and influence what kind of job you would get or, your ability to go on to graduate school. So that was that, I think that environment allowed me to always feel comfortable in environments where I was trying something new, particularly in the higher ed space, right? So I've always worked at kind of early stage experiments. And while I recognize the risks and I recognize other people's concerns about the risks, I'm comfortable with that level of risk. And I think that's just because I was adjusted to it and exposed to it at an early age and didn't experience any, ill effects. Because I'm not a thrill junkie. I don't jump out of airplanes or anything personally, but I like that excitement. Another part was the writing for sure. I think, a course is, and I'll always speak to faculty about this, a course is a rhetorical piece, right? How are you, when you think about writing, whether you're writing a short story or writing an argument or making a movie, you're trying to communicate to someone who is not there across from you, right? So you have to create something to produce a response in someone else without you being there to shepherd it along. And that's true of an asynchronous online course. It's also to some extent true a little bit of teaching in a large lecture hall. There's Sanjay Sharma at MIT has a fantastic line. She says it's all distance learning after the third row, which I think is very true. And so if you're a faculty member and you're used to crafting your lectures to reach the person in the very top row so that they can get the material and pass the exam, you're already teaching online. You have the building blocks. right?
Right.
If anything, what online does, and you alluded to this in your comments, is that these new tools and technologies give us the ability to make explicit, which is what has always been implicit in the classroom. And it's allowing us to kind of identify and unpack what not just teaching is, but also what learning is, because we don't know very much about how people learn. And now we have the ability to begin to find out. And technology serves at this point mostly as a data gathering mechanism, so that we can analyze that later.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, that's great. Yeah. I mean, just that like kind of life lesson of like being comfortable with ambiguity, like the kind of intellectual or structural ambiguity of like starting new things and like, being innovative and all that, just like that, you were in an environment that helped nurture that. And then, yeah, just like, just communication skills. Cause it's like, I mean, we're all communicating with each other all the time. Like you said, of just like, that idea of conveying an idea and not being there to actively, facilitate that all the time. But like, again, thankfully just being able to like have tools to like, do virtual office hours, doing like live sessions or something. It's like, you could at least, hopefully have students who feel comfortable being like, hey, this is what I thought about that, or like having like an active discussion about it, but still obviously would hope to, everybody's getting the same idea, with this course that you've built, that they're going through at their own pace. But, so I guess, you've had this kind of unique journey towards here, but, everything's kind of built upon itself and you're utilizing, all the experiences and things that you've learned, up until this point to now work in, online higher education, space. So, what are the things, I guess, now that you're really enjoying that, again, this is still a space where there's maybe still some like, we're laying the ground out as we go forth and everything. Like there's still things that we're figuring out and learning and improving and those sort of things. So, I feel like you've kind of alluded to it a little bit in terms of like this has been kind of a lot of what you've done before is built toward this to be like, this is like a really good space for you to kind of thrive in. But what are those pieces that you enjoy most about your current work right now? Maybe if it is like particularly at UPenn or Wharton or just like in the online space or the people you work with, anything that comes to mind?
Sure. So, top of the funnel for me is, the early adopters of MOOCs and the early folks in the MOOC space. I mean, we have a bond among us. We see each other at conferences and things, and that was really a gift, right? It was definitely that summer. It was a trial by fire. There was no. This was my first. Coursera was my first startup, like my first real startup, and we had no stealth mode. We were operating, and Tom Friedman was writing about us in the New York Times, and provosts from very high value brands were coming to us and they were wanting to engage, but also very panicked. And so, and we had, I mean, there were 20 people on staff, and that included the engineers. I mean, it was insane. And the public scrutiny was crazy. And so that experience was really special and has kept unfolding in terms of the relationships among the folks who were there initially. I think that anyone who survived through that and is still in higher ed is the kind of, innovator is such an overused word, but definitely folks who, like experimentation, appreciate and, have benefited from the current educational structure, but also understand that the current educational structure needs to change. And are happy to work in a kind of, this is going to sound weird, but almost a loving way to affect that change, right? We're not standing outside the gates, with pitchforks and, burning sticks, calling for the demise of the college institution, but more working within and getting folks comfortable with technological change and reaching new students and reaching existing students in new ways, and understanding that the world is changing, that what we've invented in terms of technology is going to change our future, and that the education delivery has to change as well. And that's exciting to me. It's extremely daunting because especially with our business courses and doing a lot of research with our learners, there are a number of policy issues that come up, not just higher ed policy, but governmental policy around workforce development, around student aid funding, around accreditation. And I'm really interested in these larger questions. And so, this work that I'm doing now has definitely given me some insight into what those questions are. And, we continue through our learners to generate these vast reams of data about how they're using our courses. And so we're actively engaged in research. So I would say the three things I come away with are the relationships with the early adopters. So now this community of higher ed change folks, for lack of a better term, the ability to do research on real data that is going to help us discover new things about teaching, about learning, and about how we can apply what we learn to work and the nature of work itself. And then these sort of larger questions that I think are going to affect how we live and learn in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, it's because I think I've, only been in this space for a couple of years, and like, it's certainly opened my eyes to just like the higher ed landscape and how things are changing on like a broader level. And just like the need to just broaden access in terms of just like, the physical space of, people just not having access to high quality education, but being able to do that digitally. And, we need more people to be able to kind of build those skills and have the credentials to, get the jobs that we need and stuff. And then, with that being like kind of a slog and hard work and everything, it's great that you have a community of people who are supportive, who, have been through it with you and everything. Because certainly, just having people to like bounce ideas off of, or even just kind of like commiserate with, where it's like, oh my gosh, like this is so hard. We're trying to figure this thing out. Or, we're dealing with like different policies and stuff. Yeah. Because it's like still in those things in higher ed. Like I think I've recognized that as well, where it's like, oftentimes in a lot of aspects of modern life, like technology is moving faster than the laws and everything. Like you have stuff like ride sharing and like Ubers and Lyft, and people are kind of catching up because like, hey, these have been around for a while, but they're like, well, you can like do it, but like, you have to do it this way or something. But it's like, we've already been using it for a really long time. And now you're just, just now being like, oh, we're going to kind of slap some different things down. But hopefully, it's the idea that we can adapt to these tools that are helping people to, especially with education, like, get their life and their career to a place where, people can have gainful employment and good lives and contribute to society and those things. Because I think, it's also the idea where it's just like different modality for the same program. Like some people it's going to be really valuable for them to be on campus and in person and those sort of things. But, just also having the option to get, the same degree, just in a different method.
Absolutely.
And I guess like, shifting gears a little bit on the, the geeky side of this, because it sounds like, you've had a past with like, because it sounds, I was going to say with your degree, like it sounded like to me, like it just sounded so like unabashedly like geeky and nerdy, where it's just like you're examining these cultural artifacts and just taking these things like so seriously, which like I do also, like I'm like, oh, the allegories of these like, superhero characters, like, they're like mythical, whatever, like archetypes or something. But so like that's what like struck me from it. But so I'm guessing, like just if that's like part of your personality, or just in terms of like how you view the world and kind of engage with things, like what are you geeking out about currently? If it's stuff that's related to your job or just kind of personally, like the hobbies that you're into, like, I guess just explore that a little bit of like those things that are kind of engaging you. Yeah.
So one thing that I love to say, because one of the courses, so I also took a lot of comp lit, and I read a lot, and I'm actually a terrible student. I just really love to read, so so I just have always read a lot, and I like to read fiction more than nonfiction. And when I was one of the courses that I was teaching at the Stanford Online High School was the sort of year-long survey of ancient literature. And that was when I really started to appreciate some of the Greek and Roman myths. And I will say that I use those more frequently than not. with faculty members when they have resistance or when I'm trying to negotiate the politics in higher ed. And I'll even say, like, let us at this point pause and turn to the literature. And by literature, I mean the Odyssey, because what you're doing right now is like, this situation is like,
Yeah, it's going back to the classics. Yeah.
Odysseus and Circe's, right? And so, and I'll say, or I know what you want to do. You want to come back and kill all of Penelope's suitors right now. That's how you want to run this meeting. And so that's really fun. And so I feel like I'm injecting a little bit of, the humanities into some of, a lot of my meetings with faculty and administrators. That's one thing I geek out about. But another thing is that I've just always been fascinated by how language is a technology and how technology just is so imperfect. And so, I guess I'll share this publicly. I mean, folks around me know it. So when I was little, I couldn't learn to read. And I was in the dumb class and I had to eventually sort of teach myself to read, but, and so my experience of school was always like, what is happening? You know what I mean? I want to be here, but I really don't know what's going on. So it was a little bit of an outsider's perspective. And so I guess I can really identify with the access part. And I don't think that school is the way that we've imagined school, which came out of, a very industrial, complex mindset, right? So it was the Industrial Revolution that really helped shape what we think of as school. It wasn't driven by pedagogy, it was driven by industry. And the whole apple cart is changing, right? It's not an industrial revolution. It drives me nuts when people talk about, we're in the fourth industrial revolution, because it's not. It has nothing to do with industry. It has to do more with imagination. I know this is going to sound like I'm one of these, entrepreneur, innovator, sort of geeks, but, one thing that I've seen in my limited view of startups and Silicon Valley and technology is that we can't build what we can't imagine. Right. So we have, and this goes right back to semiotics, right? Like, what is the cultural unconscious that we all share? What are our common touchstones? 500 years ago in Western civilization, it was the Bible. That was the common text. What is it today? What is it among developers in Silicon Valley? The people are actually building something. When you're building something, you have a vision in your head, right? When you're creating anything, you're trying to map it to this thing you have in your head. And at least if you're me, it almost always fails and it's deeply frustrating. But still, where does that picture in your head come from? A lot of what Isaac Asimov, turning to literature again, right? Like, look at Isaac Asimov, look at William Gibson. I mean, basically, much of what we're doing right now in higher ed is straight out of necromancy. So, sometimes I get frustrated because I'm like, guys, this is not new. Like, you read this when you were 17, or you should have. And so I wish that, so I geek out about that. And if I had, you didn't ask me this, but if I had my wish, I would have those who are being affected by the change and those who are creating the change have a book club and, read some of the same science fiction or I would put them in you're really fantasy, I would have a writing class and I would say, okay, we are going to write a science fiction fantasy about the year, your main character is a high school student, 17 years old, living in a rural area in the Midwest in 2040. You have 15 minutes, go. And just see what people come up with. I feel like that's what we're missing, is that sharing of ideas in that playful space, kind of like what I described from undergrad, where you can say stuff and you won't be judged on it necessarily, at least not negatively. Like, people can say it's a crappy idea, but it's not like that then is going to follow you for the rest of your life. You're going to be known as the person who had a lousy idea one day, right? Which, by the way, is what my time in the entertainment business taught me too. It's the quantity of ideas, not the quality of one idea that wins out. So that's what I geek out about, and that's kind of my geeky wish for the future, is that, I would have a big book club with a creative writing exercise attached.
Well, that sounds like a good, because they have these extended, pre-conference things at different conferences. It's like, that sounds like a great idea for somebody to and it's like, do with it as you will, I guess. Because it's just like that thoughtful, discourse and collaboration and just imagination and those sort of things. Yeah, it's like, the unknown, and you don't know what you don't know. And, people coming at just sort of a shared sort of prompt like that, and seeing how, people will think through it. Cause I think, and I appreciate you sharing, the part of your story there of your struggles of, with education, just because I think there's great capacity now in terms of accessibility, just literally. Cause again, it's if I want to get a degree from a particular university, it's if it's in the physical space, I'm only limited to the places I can commute to. And even then, that's just time wasted, going back and forth and stuff, and kind of the opportunity cost. But, if you can get, a great education from a great university online, wherever you are, that's one great point of access, but also with accessibility of whatever sort of accommodations you need is those can just be baked in and built in, just okay, there's closed captioning, and there's any of those kind of things can easily be built in, in an LMS or something like that. Like I've seen and understood that there's a lot that we can do with these platforms and stuff. So I think there's a lot of value there with people who might have certain struggles, they can be supported. And it's also not you have to be kind of singled out or something, oh, well, you're the one student in the class clearly who needs to leave to take this test or something, there's certain, things where it's just no, everybody's kind of getting to the point to get the level of support they need to be on an equal level with everybody else and stuff. And, I'm sure part of that's kind of aspirational. I think we, haven't maybe figured out everything to be so perfectly fluid and just integrated, but I feel like we're seeing good progress there. And that would certainly be something that, I think we could continue on, and would be maybe part of something that people would imagine in terms of in 20 years, I'm sure we're going to have just seamless kind of integration of those sort of things. And, just things online high schools and stuff like that, becoming perhaps just far more commonplace, and perhaps those being, integrated or something like that. But that's a great prompt. And I think it's just which I appreciate, just the serendipity of you coming onto the show, and perhaps that's just part of what drove you to it, is just I appreciate just that that geeky lens and kind of personality that you come to this all with, and just name dropping all these authors and stuff. It's just one right after the other. And I'm this is great. Just it's a little bit out of my wheelhouse. I don't I came up kind of differently, with history as sort of my backing, and always wanting kind of the context for things. Nothing just happens. There's always some kind of past that leads up to it. So it's even just you, it's I've got this library of literary knowledge, and just that's where you're coming to things with, to sort of inform, even with some levity, at times. But that idea of this shared kind of language and understanding and ideas of, how we see the world as a society. Certainly it's that is a truth, whether we are aware of it or not.
Right.
But, well, I guess on that point, I don't know if there's anything maybe that you've revisited lately that's kind of on your mind, or just new stuff that you're consuming lately, that you're reading, watching, listening to, podcasts, movies, television show, anything, I guess, that's capturing your attention that we could maybe include in the show notes.
Sure. So I just finished an awesome book called House of Broken Angels. And I can never pronounce the author's name. His last name, I think, is Urea, is how you say it. And it's just about this chaotic family. There's a funeral one day and then a birthday party the next day, but the host of the birthday party is his death is imminent. And it's a family of not even some first generation, but mostly immigrant Mexicans. And then some are legal, some are dreamers, some are not. But it's just this crazy, riotous, like all this stuff is going on and it's all mixed together. People are having, you know, flirting and having romance and dying, and there's deadly confrontations, and all of this is happening within the space of one day, a very serious funeral, and the next day what's supposed to be a very serious goodbye birthday party. And to me, I just saw the metaphor as like, we don't look at, I mean, ed tech and education is a small part of it, but generally life that way. And you just alluded to it, like it's all mixed in together, and we're so, intent upon being siloed. And I think that's the big danger for me of technology, is that in order to make the computer work, you have to break things down into black and white and tiny micro boxes. And then the tendency is to then take that box thinking outside. And really what, good software development, good technology development is, how do you combine those boxes, right? It's not about breaking everything down. It's about bringing anything together. So that's one reason why I really like that book. The other one that I'm reading, which is a nonfiction book, is called AI Superpowers, which you've probably heard about. And actually my dean, Dean Garrett, told me in our last meeting to read it. But it's written by Kai-Fu Lee. He's one of the world's most respected experts on AI in China. And he's really talking about how, AI, China's investment in AI is outpacing the US, and how that is how that's going to change not only the world order, but also, I mean, of course, I'm looking at it through an education lens, right? But I mean, China has a much more pressing problem than we do, because they've got a lot more people they need to educate with a lot less money. And they aren't wedded to, an industrial standard in the same way that we are. And so I'm very curious to finish that book and try and figure out how we're going to weave in AI in a way that's sensible. I agree with you in terms of what you were saying earlier, and another pop culture reference, right? I think technology makes us bionic, right? I don't think we get replaced by robots. I think we become the $6 million man. And when I've given, like back in the day, when I would give, teacher training, at conferences, and give like teacher training lectures on how to work with, online courses, I'd say, I'm not here to replace you. I'm here to, repair you. And then I would sing from the, $6 million man theme. And they were mostly old enough that they knew what I was talking about. But I think that idea of being bionic, which I'm fascinated, I think our new bionic man are the Marvel superheroes, so like mortals with powers. And I think that's how, if we can think about AI and technology using that, almost comic book sensibility of, how does this make me a superhero? How does it make my kid a superhero, right? How can we make society better? And, I know I said, believe me, I can be super cynical and clear-eyed and skeptical, but for God's sake, can we please start imagining a better future, and one in which it's not going to be rampaging robots, who are trying to kill us? Again, that's what we've written. And I love me a good robo-apocalyptic tale. I love reading about, and the trucks are all gonna, talk to each other and, take over the freeways and destroy our buildings. And I work for the School of Engineering here with their online degree, and their dean actually does the robot swarm, right? It's the drone swarm. They call it the swarm, right? The drones that talk to each other. I love that stuff. That's awesome. How can we use it to alleviate poverty and the lack of education, and all of and climate change? And can we please focus on that alongside the skepticism, which is necessary. We can't let it go unfettered. But let's think about what can happen and be excited instead of thinking about what can happen and crying into our beer, I guess.
Right. And I appreciate that sentiment because I'm the optimist, the eternal optimist, and like so much potential. Yeah, of like drones. People are like, oh, these things or whatever. They're, just kind of cynical or skeptical. Which it's like a fair dose of skepticism is good, but don't let it rule your life when you're just like questioning everything and everybody, there's some sort of conspiracy or something, but it's like,
right.
Drones can help like put out fires with people having to risk their lives. They can get supplies into remote areas that are hard to get to otherwise. And there's a lot of good things with those and, just making those as effective as possible. But I use that metaphor often that I think a lot of people say like technology is the best when it gets out of your way and being augmented with it. It's like, in the geeky classifications, it's like, you have your robots that are clearly like artificial beings and then like androids, which are like the Terminator, where it's like, it's like a robot that looks like a human, but it's all robot. But then it's like you have a cyborg who is like a human augmented with technology. So it's like, they're not being replaced. They're just being like augmented. And then like also with like automation and like different, use cases for technology, it's like it's going to get to a place where it's like it's like helping us to do things better and also like getting out of our way where it's not so like kind of intrusive or those sort of things. And again, it's like there's like the human potential to solve the problems that we create too. If it's like, oh well, then there's like privacy issues or these sort of things or surveillance or something, it's like, well, like we made it, then we need to make it in a way that's more conducive to the way that we want it to operate and all that. So it's like any skepticism that is like fair and important and necessary, it's like let's channel that energy in the right way to articulating structures to be the way that we want them to be, and like put laws in place or policies and stuff. And again, back to that other point of like things far behind pace of where they should be, it's like that's the way to do it. It's like, okay, well, you can't do this and you have to do it this way if you are going to do it or whatever. So definitely appreciate the optimism, and that segues perfectly to our optimistic end note that we always do for every episode here. So we'll end with anything or things that you are looking forward to in your job, life, and or the world. So it can be any of those things, all of those things. Anything that comes to mind that you are looking forward to.
All right. Well, let's see. I am looking forward to someone making the Jetsons for the future today.
Right.
So when is someone going, hello, my old peeps in Hollywood, will someone make the Jetsons, for 2050?
Because also, like, if they did it, they'd probably make it into this like gritty reboot or something, which is like, no, like literally just make it like it was now. Like,
where is the happy vision of the future? And and I know this is on bumper stickers everywhere, but where is my flying car?
Right.
I was promised flying cars as a child in the 60s and 70s. Where's my flying car? And I also would welcome my robot overlord, because people can be confusing.
Just like a little buddy, like somebody helping you out with stuff. Yeah.
Well, like he'll tell me what needs to happen each week, and then I get a lot of latitude and autonomy as to how I get it done, because he or she, wow, we'll have to have a new pronoun for a robot, won't we? Is just going to, that all the creativity and imagination part will be left up to, me, the human. And that to me sounds awesome.
Because again, it's like something that gets out of your way, helps you to do what you need to, and keeps you on track with stuff. So it's like you can see a lot of those things like starting to happen now. But then if it's like just an even smarter hub of just helping us all to live our lives in the way that we want to and all that, certainly something to look forward to. And I appreciate you sharing all that you did and you making some time here for the podcast. It was great talking with you. And we'll have the stuff that we mentioned in the show notes as usual, and ways to connect with Anne. But just thank you again so much. And maybe if I'm up in Philadelphia sometime soon here, I'm down in Baltimore down the road, hopefully we can maybe cross paths here. But
absolutely, yes, please come up. And if I'm in DC, I'll hop off the train and we can have lunch or something.
Yeah, there you go. Awesome. Well, again, yeah, thanks again for your time and have a good rest of your day.
Thank you, Dustin. It was such a treat. I really appreciate your time and for reaching out to me.
Yeah,
I had a blast.
This podcast is part of the ConnectEDU Podcast Network, bringing together diverse voices in the higher ed community. Check us out on Twitter at ConnectEDUPod or at ConnectEDU.network. Thanks for listening to this episode of the podcast. Make sure to rate, review, and subscribe so you never miss an episode. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode of the Higher Ed Geek Podcast.